Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hi, Malika here. As we enter 2025, we're looking back at the stories that define 2024. Today, we're in Sudan. For much of the year, Sudan's civil war was seen as a stalemate, despite the immense toll it was taking on civilians. For millions of Sudanese who were forced to flee, either internally or as refugees, the search for safety was marked by hardship, along with the feeling of being abandoned by the international community. Then, a surprise offensive by the Sudanese army challenged the Rapid Support Force's hold on the capital. In this episode, we hear from one woman who shares the fragile hope she holds on to for Sudan's future and tells us what it's like to watch the world move on while her country remains in crisis. This episode originally aired on September 30th, 2024. So all dates and references reflect that time. Here's the show.
1, 2, 3.
Hey everyone, it's Malika Bilal, host of The Take. Our show today is something new. The Take is now on video daily. In an era of news that has to be seen to be believed, we're venturing out to bring you our stories from around the world, not just for your ears, but for your eyes too. You'll find me in the comments. Now, here's today's show. Today, a refugee of Sudan's civil war on her hope for return.
I wanted to stay. I never wanted to leave. It was just no longer safe.
As a new military offensive unfolds, the story of one woman who's determined to keep the world watching. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
Hi, I'm Dalia Abdelmoniem. I am a Sudanese citizen who had to flee her country when war broke out in April of 2023. I'm now currently residing in Cairo, Egypt.
My guest today isn't in Sudan, but to her, it's still her whole world.
I basically eat, breathe, and sleep and wake up to Sudan. My life revolves around everything that's happening in my country right now.
Well, Dalia, welcome to The Take. With an introduction like that, you are the perfect person to talk to. You, as you said, you are speaking to me from Cairo, Egypt, but your home is in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. So let's start at the beginning. Take me back to the moment that you knew you had to flee.
There were several moments. Number one, when our house was hit by a missile, and we knew we weren't safe. And the second moment is when I kept looking at my mother and my nephew and nieces, and the fear that they had in their eyes. I was like, I wanted to stay. I never wanted to leave. You know, my mother's an elderly lady. My nephew and nieces are kids. They're 13 years, at the time they were 13 and 15 years old, and a 2-year-old. And they weren't eating, they weren't sleeping. They were a bundle of nerves. And your home is supposed to be your safe zone. When you no longer feel safe in that home, then you know it's time to leave. We had snipers in the buildings around us. The bombing was literally over our heads. I mean, we didn't sleep. Our house was literally shaking every 5 minutes from the continuous artillery shots, and we'd wake up and find bullet shells in our garden. It was just, it was a nightmare. So we decided we had to leave. And we're lucky enough that we were able to leave. We were able to get people to help us to get out of our house safely and go to a safe house. But so many others weren't. I mean, when we left our house, I remember a friend of mine had called me and he's like, cover the kids' eyes because there's bodies all over the roads. And there were bodies in the house in the road in front of our house. And it's, you realize now that I've suppressed this memory for a long time because it's been more than a year, but I think I've suppressed it, but I haven't. It's still there, it's still in my mind.
Of course. Dalia, I'm sorry to make you relive that. And you can tell that the lingering trauma, because I'm still stuck on the fact that you said there were two moments, but the first moment was a missile striking your home.
I think if you spoke to any Sudanese the first 48 hours, I think without fail, all of us would have said the same thing. This will pass. This is just a small, fighting. It will pass. But the minute your safe haven was breached, that's when you know this is not going to pass. We've always had wars in Sudan, but it's never been in the center, in the capital. And it was just no longer safe, And the missile that hit our house actually hadn't exploded. It just went through the roof and landed in my brother's bedroom. So it could have gone off any second. We had, who's there to call to come and defuse it or do something? There's no one. We're in the middle of a war. And so it was just, the decision was made for us.
Yeah. Well, Dalia, you started this journey out of Khartoum with 28 people from your family. What's happened to you and your family since?
We're all over the place. My brother and his family have moved to Rwanda. Some other cousins of mine are based in Saudi Arabia. Some are in the UAE. Some are here in Egypt. It's a matter of luck where people ended up in. We're all over the place. In regards to my father's side of the family, I don't think we have any members of our family left in Sudan. We're like 5 generations of my father's family is no longer present in the country. And that's a very sobering thought because as a family, we've always been like business owners and we've helped. One of those people who we're patriotic. We love Sudan. We love our country. And we always built any future we had with the idea that this is for Sudan. So the fact that we've all been forced to leave and we don't know if we'll ever be going back anytime soon is just a horrible idea, but that's the reality that we're living in.
Well, Dalia, it seemed like things have been quiet for a while in your former hometown in the capital in Khartoum. That changed on Thursday when Sudan's army launched a major offensive to regain ground that was held by the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF.
Now, Sudan is again in a state of crisis. A war that had never ended is marking a new turning point. This morning, the army bombarded parts of the capital to force the paramilitary out. And like before, the civilians are paying the heavy price.
Members of the army could be seen on social media celebrating as they retook control of an area just north of the capital. Al Jazeera's correspondent Hiba Morgan is based in Khartoum as well. You tweeted as this offensive was happening that people should follow her as one of the last remaining journalists who are there getting the word out.
Now, we have seen in the past days the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces launching, that's a bullet just flew overhead. We've seen the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces in the past few days launching artillery strikes. And we've seen in the early hours of Thursday morning the army launching a major offensive to try to retake major positions here in the capital, Khartoum.
Between artillery fire and a massive power outage, we're not speaking to her today. You are still in touch with people in Khartoum and you've been following the news there. What do you know about what happened on Thursday and the latest, what's happened since?
We all knew once the rainy season came to an end, the fighting would intensify. But we never thought of Khartoum. The focus was always on Al-Fashir in Darfur because that was like the last bastion that the RSF hadn't taken control of in the western part of the country. The new offensive by the army in Khartoum, I think, took everyone by surprise. And it was interesting because there's been so many reports flying around that the army had been able to get new weaponry, new ammunition from Iran, from Russia. Some reports even said Algeria and Turkey. And so it seems that lull in the fighting was basically them gathering and, formatting this new offensive, which I think even took the RSF by surprise. The army tends to use aerial bombardment, but it wasn't just that. There was also a ground offensive. At the same time, we've been down this road before. where the army seemingly has been victorious, only for it to be turned around and the RSF emerges the winner in that battle, so to speak. You mentioned the videos of army soldiers celebrating. My timeline in all my social media platforms was of pure jubilation. It was like we won the war. It was just amazing. And it was also very uplifting. But I always say I had to take a step back and say, let's not celebrate too early yet, because with the RSF, you never know. They're a well-trained, well-oiled killing machine of a militia with arms and weaponry that is sophisticated and the latest when it comes to weaponry. And they have deep pockets.
So who are the outside players accused of fueling Sudan's conflict? That's after the break. Hey everyone, before we continue, we really want to know more about you and how you feel about our podcasts. So we have a brief survey for you. Stay tuned to the end of this episode to find out how you can have your say. Dalia, earlier you mentioned deep pockets. The RSF has deep pockets. So Sudan's army chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, addressed the UN General Assembly in New York on Thursday. And that was just hours after the launch of this major offensive.
First and foremost, we need to put an end to the hostilities. The militias must withdraw from all of the areas they currently occupy and from which people have been displaced. They must lay down their weapons so that people can go back to their homes and so that assistance can be delivered.
He mentioned that other countries in the region are providing funds and fighters to the RSF. But he didn't name any names. Who is he referencing here?
The army has, on occasion, several times, like the foreign ministry and the delegation to the United Nations, have accused the UAE of being the major sponsor of the RSF, supporter and sponsor. And there's also been UN reports by fact-finding missions who have stated, and also media reports from the likes of the Washington Post and the New York Times and so on, others, of the UAE's role in regards to the RSF. Of course, the UAE has denied these reports, but you can deny one or two. But when there's a stream of fingers being pointed at you, and you even have members of Congress and you even have members of the British Parliament coming out and saying the UAE must stop its support of the RSF, it says something. But at the same time, the RSF has its own means of finance. Hemeti, the leader of the RSF, owns one of the largest, or if not the largest, gold mine in Sudan. They have a large number of businesses, all based in the UAE. They have gold company, they have financing, they have security, and don't forget the militia. They've been bankrolled, and they were paid heavily by the former government of Omar al-Bashir, and they were also paid under this something where the EU paid the Sudanese government and Hemeti's men to set up camps to halt migrants from crossing over the Med into Europe. So there's so many different entities that have lined the pockets of the RSF. But currently, at this moment in time, it is the likes of the UAE, the likes of Ethiopia, the likes of Haftar in Libya, fingers have been pointed at as, the ones who are basically enabling the RSF to continue its war in Sudan.
And that's the rogue Libyan general Khalifa Haftar in Libya. Dalia, out of all of those alleged players helping to line those pockets of the RSF, the one that has gotten the most attention, perhaps, and criticism is the United Arab Emirates. The Grammy Award-winning U.S. musician Malcolm Moore, he has said that until the UAE stops funding the RSF, he won't be performing in the country. And that got a lot of applause from people online. You could see people really respect that decision. But that seems to be a rare sight these days when it comes to public awareness of what's happening and why it's happening in Sudan. Why do you think that is? And what do you make of Malcolm Moore's move?
I salute him and I applaud him because he's shown that he's a man of integrity and that his words do mean something and he stands by his words and his deeds. But what's the sad part is that it didn't get enough media traction like it should have. And you have other artists who are going to be performing in the UAE who've remained silent. When you have the likes of Coldplay, who have been advocating for Palestine and what's been happening in Gaza for so long and for so many years, and talking about the environment and so on, and they're going to perform, it's selective activism. You know, the whole boycott movement during when the Gaza conflict erupted, it's kind of died down as well. Because I remember when we had the revolution, the whole world was blue for Sudan. It was on trend to be blue for Sudan 2 years ago, but it's no longer the case.
Changing people's profile pictures and making sure there was a little mark on social media. Is that what you mean?
Just talking about it, just saying, hey, the people, the youth are going out revolting against a 30-year-old dictator, but we're now being killed. And no one's talking about it. It seems like an echo chamber. We as Sudanese, we keep talking about it, but I post and I get people asking me, oh, so what happened? When it comes to Sudan, it's like there's a blank canvas in front of their eyes. I don't know if they don't want to hear or they don't care or there's conflict fatigue, as in not another conflict. But this is not just any normal conflict. It's a proxy war being waged over resources, over geopolitics. And when you have more than 25 million facing famine, our population is only 42 million, so that's more than half of us are facing famine. When you have the largest number of people displaced in the world, 11 million, that's the size of three countries' population. But people don't care. It's just... It gets a bit tiring after a while when you keep repeating this and it seems like I'm talking to a wall. No one's listening. Even those who are in positions of policy change and government policy and so on, they just nod. I had a diplomat telling me, yeah, our economic ties with the UAE supersede everything. So when someone tells that to you, what do you do? Wow. I literally had to stop myself from getting up from the table. But
yeah,
what can you do?
Well, tell me more. What do you do? Especially because I've had conversations with Sudanese friends who feel frustrated but don't know what to do. They do think some of it is conflict fatigue. Some of it is racism. What do you do? And what do you think it is?
I think I used to go out in protest, I would post, but then I realized that's not going to change anything because I saw it with what was happening in Palestine, all these protests and nothing's changed. So I took a step back and I was like, we need a change in policy. We need to refocus people, policymakers, the powers that be, they need to refocus and realize that this war needs further attention. And the longer they ignore it, the worse it's going to become, not just for Sudan, but for the region overall, the whole Horn of Africa, East Africa bloc. And already this whole continent is in turmoil, where if you look from the Sahel all the way down to the Red Sea, from west to east, it's just turmoil. And so that's what I do. But I also, advocate for the crowdfunding, for the community, community kitchens, the young youth, boys and girls, women and men of Sudanese who literally have nothing, and they make sure that at least this community of 60,000 people is getting at least one meal a day. And so I advocate for them because they're the ones who are actually doing something. And they're the ones who are literally, risking their lives to make sure that the rest of us don't die. And so I always say, whatever you can do, you do it.
You have worked as a civil society activist, and you wrote a piece for Al-Jazeera.com in 2023 after having to flee Khartoum. And you talked about what you were leaving behind, what you were taking, the fact that you have a cat named Thawra, which means revolution. It reminds me that the roots of what we're seeing today in Sudan, well, They came from the Sudanese people's fight for democracy and justice, this uprising of a few years ago. What does revolution mean to you today?
Revolution just means, the protection of the people. And revolution just means change, complete change, not just a facade where you just change, you take one person, you replace him with someone else. There needs to be actual change from the ground up, from organically. And when I put a positive spin on the war, I'm like, well, we've hit that nadir where everything's been destroyed. So, the only way forward is to move up, is to progress. So once you've hit that lowest point, you can only go up from there on. But there's nowhere else we can go further down than we already are. We're at the pits of everything. So that's my positive spin on it, that this is the true revolution. There'll be a social change, there'll be a political change, there'll be an economic change, a military change. And I think this is something that we've all realized has to happen, and it will happen, because what other choice do we have?
If and when it does happen, because I'm going to be optimistic with you. I referenced that piece from AlJazeera.com, and it's entitled, "I'll Be Back Soon." So when that does happen, what are you looking forward to getting back to in Khartoum?
Just being back home. Just smelling that air, just seeing the streets that I grew up on. And they're not going to be the same, but just, I didn't say goodbye when I left, because I actually thought I'd be back soon. So I want to go back, and I hope I can go back soon and just start from zero. I think we're all willing to put in a shift and to make sure that, we rebuild our country again. We have to, we can't remain displaced all over the world for so long, We have to.
And that's The Take. Well, I can't let you go without asking what happened to Thoda. How's your cat doing?
I have no idea. We have no news about our area. Is still completely controlled by RSF. We have no idea if our house is even standing or what's happened to it. We have no clue. And a part of us doesn't want to know. We just want to keep the memory that we have of it. So, but
Of course.
I may have lost Soda, but being in Egypt, I've adopted something like 8 or 9 cats.
All little
mini Sauras, yeah.
mini
Sauras, yeah.
At Al Jazeera Podcast, we want to hear from listeners like you. So if you have a few minutes, go to aljazeera.com/survey and tell us about yourself. From things like how you listen to us, to what kind of shows you want to listen to, or topics you'd like us to cover. Again, that's aljazeera.com/survey.